Welcome to Digital Thread Bites, a workforce development podcast produced by the Digital Thread Initiative team at Sinclair College in Dayton, Ohio. In this podcast, the team discusses the coming revolution in digital, highlighting digital transformation success stories and opportunities for learning. Here are your hosts, Elizabeth Generous and Jennifer Gravitt.
Hello and welcome to the Digital Thread Bites second podcast episode regarding digital literacy. And we have with us today Mr. Craig McAtee, the Executive Director of NCATC, the National Coalition of Advanced Technology Centers. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about this increasingly digital world that we are living in, the needs that people have, just how to develop these skills in education and workforce development, and where we need to go from here. So to get us started, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and NCATC, please?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on, and looking forward to seeing how this turns out. For myself, I've spent 25 years in advanced manufacturing, starting in the mid-'70s through the turn of that century. I'm a recovering engineer, as I tell people. Materials and plant management, my background, including some global distributor and supply chain networking. We digitized the sales network over the country before I left that company. And then in '99, I joined the MEP in Cleveland, Ohio, working with digitizing the supply chain for the military, trying to get airplanes up in the air because they couldn't find prints for certain things like wing gaskets, and we had to reverse engineer those things. And that was digitization in 1999. And got involved with NCATC around 2001 and found this network of people that we are all about doing the same things we're trying to do now in the 21st century. It's never ending, the future of work. So I was hired in '07 as the executive director of NCATC, and I've led that organization for the last 15 years. And a little bit about NCATC, we were formed about 35 years ago by two very giant telecom companies, IBM and Lucent Technologies. They came together with Cord in Texas and the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and said, we need to find a handful of good community colleges that we can get our training out there. And they selected 9 in about 6 states to start NCATC out, focused on technical workforce training for what became the backbone of the internet. More digitization, right? So that was a really good starting point in '88.
Yeah, I think it's incredible that you started this in 1989. You think about where we are now and our struggle to just get realization of what the benefits of digitization are. Holy moly, you were doing it in 1989.
Yeah, this isn't really anything new to you, Craig, but it's fantastic.
Iterative. It started back in the '70s, and that was really the starting point.
So NCATC is focused on 3 main policies for education and workforce development. Number 1 is digital literacy skills. Why is digital literacy skills important for NCATC? Let
me just first say that in our world, there are at least 3 specific levels of digital literacy. Okay, so let's set the stage for the myths. Okay. First, there's the foundational level, which is really your competence of using a mouse or understanding how to search on the internet, or even basic email or Office 365, Word, and Excel. So that's the foundational part. The next level is kind of like the usage of applications on the job. So how to run the company's ERP system, or understand how to do your organizational intranet, maybe communicate that way. And then, of course, advanced would be like cybersecurity, data analytics, and computer science. But really, the functional skills and creativity and critical thinking are all part of this digital literacy needs, and they come in. We've got a lot of rural areas that don't even have access to internet yet, and we need to get there.
In regards to all of this fast moving, transitioning and all of this, what is a common myth about digital literacy?
One of the myths that I've become very much aware of is digital literate teachers know everything about technology, or they need to. Well, that's not true. just knowing about what exists out there so you can share with your students the possibilities is the starting point. It's really about problem solving and critical thinking and what tools are out there. You don't have to be an expert to be able to communicate digital literacy to you or me or any student. A lot of times they think that digital literacy should be taught as a separate skill. Not true. Again, that's another myth. It really needs to be a way of thinking, integrated in all things that you learn and do. And I think that's really another myth. It's like it's just standalone. Like it's not. It should not be a standalone. And you don't have to be a digital expert to be able to teach digital skills. As I mentioned, it's more about it's less about holding on to the knowledge and more about how you access that knowledge and where to go to find it. Because the more you know, the less you know once you get into technology, as you know. So those are some of the myths that I've learned in my short time of working with industry and technicians and education as well.
That's for sure. The more you know, the less you know. That's
That's a great line right there.
very much so. And then the whole change culture that you're talking about too, that seems to be a common thread as we talk to a lot of people in various areas of digital transformation. So
Absolutely.
So transitioning into your NCATC pillars, for that future of work, what is the biggest challenge facing the workforce right now?
Well, there's quite a few, as you can imagine. And of course, the COVID pandemic exacerbated everything. As we know, it exponentially sped up the adoption of digital tools and technology in everyday work. What we're doing right now is via Zoom. Who would have heard of Zoom in 2018, right? It was barely there. The same goes with MS Teams and everything else that we've been doing virtually for the last 3 years. You know that in technology, like robotics is a good example, many companies adopted things that they were just thinking about. A 10-year plan of technology implementation, like at meatpacking companies, just to give them one example, happened in less than a year during 2020 because they couldn't find enough workers, and a lot of the workers were getting sick and not making it back to work. So robotics came in and actually took over a lot of those jobs because they needed to keep up with the demands as well as the employment issues. So, and that's a continual issue with everything, not just robotics, 3D printing and all the other things with artificial intelligence. So digital skills are ubiquitous across all industries. While I'm focused on manufacturing and supply chain and other things, healthcare and transportation and logistics, skills are becoming obsolete faster than ever before, though. The average shelf life of a skill acquired today is only 5 years, and 87% of the organizations already suffer skills gaps. It's a huge problem, and it's not getting solved as quickly as we need to. Really, the employers need to be empowered to create the future of work today. That culture you mentioned earlier is a huge gap in a lot of especially small and medium-sized companies, which unfortunately, or fortunately, in this case, are 85% of employers are small and medium-sized, right? Yeah, you hear about Boeing and you hear about Airbus and Mercedes-Benz and Honda and all the great companies that we have, but it takes 85% of the companies that are small and medium to supply them with the components they need. And that's where most of our workforce works. And so getting the culture to adopt to new technology and digital skills of their employees, upskilling their employees that exist, let alone the pipeline and coming in, is a real gap, and it's getting bigger. So cultivating and inspiring the workplace culture is a huge part of it. Obviously, with the pandemic, managing and engaging more of a remote workforce is another big gap, as you know. And that digital literacy really is now outweighing tenure and experience. It's really more important to most companies that people have those digital skills than ever before. They're very important. And the average number of skills required for a single job, this comes from Deloitte, just studied last week, are increasing at 6% annually, the number of skills required for a single job, continuing to add on every year. So if you have 10 skills you need to know now, you're going to need to know 6% more in the next year. So it's coming quickly.
In the industries we've talked to, the new jobs are more fun than the old jobs. So I think there's a lot of fear in what you're describing, that these old jobs will go away and there's these new jobs and I need new skills and will continue to need new skills. But the new jobs are exciting, working
Right.
with robots.
Yeah. They're fun and they take that monotony out of the job. Then people are so worried that, well, they're going to take jobs, but they're actually creating new jobs that are more fun and that allow you to build upon those skills so that you can get more and more knowledge. So it's very interesting. Along that line too, because you're talking about the breakneck speed at which this is happening, is there anything about all of this that keeps you up at night?
Well, there's a lot that keeps me up at night, especially around the workforce and the future of, our United States and the globe for that matter. I will say that you're spot on, Jen, when it comes to change is happening so quick, and it's all about culture and leadership and all that. But the U.S. education system, from our perspective, is broken, and it's not keeping up at all with our workforce development needs. And, our 20th century models of hours-based seat time, credit hours, if you will, hold us back with the innovation needed for meeting business and industry's needs. And they have been for at least as long as I've been involved with NCATC, 25 years now. The earn and learn models that I mentioned earlier, coupled with short-term applied skills-based training and education, are needed to replace more rapidly the old traditional, pedagogies and methodologies of training. Employers need to be much more involved, leading as part of the solutions to these growing gaps in education. And that employer engagement that I talked about in '88 with those two companies forming NCATC, that continues to be in our lifeblood. 45 now corporate partners. If you're not involved with what we're doing, not at a national level, but at a local level, like where you are at the community level, they are part of the problem, not the solution. So we talk to them about rolling up their sleeves and getting tours of their plants and their organizations to parents and kids alike, as well as counselors and teachers from K through 16. So we understand what's behind the doors of advanced technology, manufacturing, and supply chain. And the other thing is education needs to really much more adapt and change and move at the speed of business. And the last thing I'll say that keeps me up at night is if you do the math, there's just under 1,200 community and technical colleges in the United States, and that includes Puerto Rico and Guam. Of those, if we were just to say, and I'm stealing this line from one of my good friends and colleagues, Tony Aran from Festo, who I was just with in PA last week at the ARM Institute on robotics. But he always says this, and we talked about it for the last 5 years. If every one of those 1,200 community technical colleges were able to produce another 100 new technicians every year, we still would be way short of the needs of 2.3 million gap of technology workers in manufacturing by 2030. We'll not make it. So we've got to have much more creativity, much more speed and rapid response to industry's needs from our colleges and high schools. That's another part of the solution. So these are the things I went on for a while, but in a list that I just gave you that keep me up at night, how do we make this up? How do we catch up from all the things we've not done right for a long time?
That was impressive. And your passion for this is evident. And we really appreciate your knowledge base. And it's just evident. You really want to share this information and help people to help themselves. So it's okay. You went on. it was
Well,
completely acceptable.
You can cut whatever doesn't match.
That's great.
My favorite part of this question, because this is our signature question that we're going to ask everybody, is these are the things that really matter. If it keeps you up at night, it really matters. And then I think for Jennifer and I, we're going to have a lot of things keeping us up at night. The idea of 2.3 million as a gap in the need for technicians, that's a staggering number.
7 years from now.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
That's an incredible number.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's going to grow because people are going to retire and we're still having trouble, as you know, filling the pipeline of students that are interested, because parents have always thought for the last 50, 60, 70 years that four-year institutions are the only way that their children should get an education. I think most of us can speak on this podcast that there were recipients of a four-year or more degree. That is great, but it's not going to suffice. Let's give people some really good skills and knowledge and abilities to be employed. And most of the companies, even the small and mediums, will take it from there and train beyond and allow tuition reimbursement to keep people growing. Because just because you start as a robot technician doesn't mean you're going to end up there in the next 5 years. You could be a manager or go into accounting or human resources or any number of facets of manufacturing that people don't even think of that are there as high paid, high skilled jobs.
It's exciting. It's very exciting. You just want people, more and more people, to grasp onto this possibility. So,
yeah.
So to wrap this up, we have some listeners on our podcast. We've had the first episode. This will be the second episode. If our many listeners would like to find out more about NCATC, find out more about fixing the broken system, get parents involved, get the current students involved, counselors involved, what is a good way to find out more how they can take advantage of these opportunities?
Well, one of our best resources at our website at www.ncatc.org. That's pretty simple. And there's pull-down menus in there for all our recorded best practice webinars. We'll add this podcast when it's released in all the digital podcasts that you present. We'd like to have links to that. We also have 15 years of newsletters with best practices of colleges and industry collaborating online there, and a pull down menu there. And of course, we have events. We returned to our personal in-person events this past September in North Carolina, and next year we'll be in Wichita, Kansas with WSU Tech. Those are always good conferences to do face-to-face comparing and integration. But we're also on all the social media platforms with all of our best practices and promising practices sharing in LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, YouTube. Yes, and we're even on Twitter.
I would expect you to be on every platform. It's digital and it's excellent. So Thank you, Craig, so much. We cannot tell you how much we appreciate your time being on our podcast and just being out there on the front lines trying to bring all of this information to people who can make a difference. Thank you so much. And we look forward to working with you in the future for sure.
Thank you both. We really appreciate being invited to do this with you. And we really appreciate all the great work you are doing as well, especially in these podcast series. So thank you.
Podcast number 2 is about digital literacy. And an interesting thing happened when we were actually developing the series and putting these events in place. We felt like it was really important to have this be a cornerstone of the series, but I was using data literacy to describe this podcast.
As was I, because we actually believe them to be interchangeable, much like, I will go ahead and say it, some people use digital thread and digital twin interchangeably. And so we really were educated on this very point and needed to share that with our audience for sure.
Yeah, so these are different skills. Digital literacy is the basic ability to find, evaluate, and use information technology and use the internet the way that it naturally comes to some people, especially the new generations that are so digitally literate, different from data literacy.
Yeah, data literacy is more about understanding how data is collected and analyzed and used. So it is actually very different. And we now know this and needed to share this with our audience. And that's why we had digital literacy as the focus for the podcast. But our workshop for December will be focusing on data literacy. And we would encourage you to join us in person or virtually for this workshop that's coming up on December 14th with Professor Paul Hansford from Sinclair College.
Yeah, it was actually Paul that pointed it out to us that we were using this interchangeably, and we're incredibly grateful for him to point that out. So we realized there was a difference and can talk about that difference because it's very important.
Absolutely. So Thank you all for tuning in, and hopefully we will see you at the December 14th workshop.
Thank you for listening. The Digital Thread Initiative team would like to thank Sinclair College, prime contractor Arctos, the United States Air Force, and our guests for walking into the future with us. If you'd like to contact Sinclair's Digital Thread Initiative, please email sinclairdigitalthread@gmail.com.